We are princes and princesses in the kingdom of God. And that is a great thought to consider, but especially considering the parable that we're discussing this week, the father and his sons. Well, what that means to us as Christians is we're princes in the kingdom of God. Our brother is the King of Kings. And so if you're a lady and you are his sister, then you're a princess in his kingdom. And me being his brother, I get to be a prince in that kingdom. Not just any kingdom, but the greatest kingdom that ever has existed, never will exist. We need to take just a few minutes to consider, what is my responsibility to be my brother's keeper? It's a good question. That question is as old as brothers themselves. The first brothers had this question come up. Cain killed Abel. His father came to him, and as we'll see at one point during this sermon this afternoon, when he came to him, he gently entreated him. He asked him questions. But the response comes back. This question comes back from Cain. I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And that question echoes down throughout the Scriptures, even down to the Christian relationship, brother and sister relationship today. And God's answer was then what it is today. It's always been the same. A resounding yes. Yes, you are your brother's keeper. Many congregations have something they call Sisters Keepers. It's a program where sisters in the congregation look out for one another and they do various things. I really don't know exactly what they do because, again, I'm not a sister. I've never been in one of those programs. But what they do is they engage in various activities that help them get to know one another better, help them get to share one another's struggles. And so they keep each other. They help one another. But this morning, sisters, you are your brother's keeper, you're your sister's keeper. Brothers, you're your brother's keeper, you're your sister's keeper. What is my responsibility there? We're going to consider it from our text, from Luke chapter 15. And we're going to consider this in 4 points. Number 1, a pronoun problem. We're going to notice from the attitudes of these men in this parable that there is a bit of a pronoun problem taking place. Then we're going to consider a crucial contrast. We're going to contrast two brothers and see a difference that we can see in the two. And then we're going to look at some reasonable responses based upon the things we've learned from those. And finally, I have for you this afternoon a simple solution. It's not my solution, it's God's solution. And we will discuss that. And that truly is the main part of the sermon. What is the point to asking these questions if we don't have a solution? There is not one. So we will come to a solution this afternoon, each of us as individuals. Now, to begin this, before we go into this pronoun problem, it must be stated here that there is no point to discussing this if I'm going to act like an elder brother the entire time. I cannot sit in the pew and I cannot stand behind the pulpit today, and I can't stand up here and think about what you need and what the brother on the second row here needs and what the sister in the back needs. And you can't sit there and think about what the member back at my congregation needs and what the person down the pew from me needs. If I'm going to look at this parable correctly, I've got to take the attitude from the start of the one who was penitent, the prodigal who became penitent. I've got to take the attitude from the start. I need to look at self. Otherwise, there's no point to the subject. I need to consider self. Consider the pronoun problem in Luke chapter 16. If you have your Bible, go ahead and look there. Let's start with the youngest to be involved in this, which is the prodigal brother. I'm going to notice a couple of things here. First of all, let's consider the prodigal when he was in his deepest state of despair and sin. He says in verse 17, it says, when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? Notice the pronoun, the possessive pronoun there. A pronoun simply a word that stands in place of a noun. And if it's possessive, it means it shows ownership. He is saying here, my Father. He's showing ownership of the Father. Even though he's in a pig pen, he's looking back to that good Father and saying, that's my Father. That's going to be important as we move forward to the older brother. Even in verse 18, he says, I will arise and go to my Father. But watch, that's a beautiful attitude to recognize that he is my Father. But watch even more in verse 19, the possessive pronoun he has, because he makes a plan here. And you've heard it multiple times, but have you considered the possessive pronoun there? He says, I'm no more worthy to be called thy son. That's what I'm going to say to him. I'm not worthy to be called thy son. I'm not worthy of you, Father, using the possessive pronoun of me. You're my Father, but I'm not worthy for you to call me my son. He follows through with those actions. In verse 21, he goes to the Father. He says just that. I'm no more worthy to be called thy son. There's the attitude of the prodigal son as seen in the pronouns he uses showing possession in the parable. We see in the prodigal a young man who still feels a family connection. You know, we don't really care very well for things that are not ours. Have you ever noticed that? I can tell you this. When I have video games, I have DVDs at my house, and when I use them, I put them back in the case. I've noticed when other people come to my house and they use my video games or my DVDs, I find them lying all over the place. And if you've ever used one of those rental stores, they don't really have those much anymore, but back when they had the rental stores, did you ever notice that when they came out with DVDs, it was always scratched? At the rental store, the DVD was always scratched. It doesn't belong to you. You ever notice rental cars? If you've got a rental car that's got very many miles on it, it's got stains all in it. It's got scratches on it. It's kind of nasty and dingy. Why? Hotel rooms, they keep them as nice as you keep your room in your home? No. We don't take care of things that we don't feel some ownership or some possessive nature to. And in the relationship that's regarded here, the possessive is family. Who is my brother? My brother is my family. When I say my, I'm talking about the people that are mine. Who are those? Those are the family. But watch as we move to the elder brother and what he says. The elder brother comments, I'm not going to go through the account here because even within my scriptures, I'm not going to do that because you've heard it so many times. But go to verse 30. He's outside. He says, but as soon as this thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, thou hast killed for him the fatted calf, and said unto him, son, and he said unto him, son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. Thy son, who devoured thy living. And he said before that, I've kept thy commandments. You didn't kill for me the fatted calf. He has this thy attitude. This is the attitude of the elder brother. It's different than the attitude of the prodigal. Thy. But what is the attitude truly seen here? He is not saying my father. He's not saying my brother. What is he saying? And you say, well, naturally what he's saying is he's distancing himself from the brother. And he's saying he's showing a lack of love for the brother. But really, that's not the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is not a lack of the love for the brother. That exists, but that's not where this began. And that's just scriptural. Anytime a man does not love a brother, it starts with a lack of love for the father. And that's the case here. His problem is he doesn't love his father. How do I know that? Because his father comes out to entreat him and he just points the finger. I kept thy commandments. Thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. Thou never gavest me. And now this thy son comes. Thou killest for him. Thy. I don't love you. That's the problem here. He doesn't love the father, and what it leads to is hate in his heart for the brother. He doesn't accept the father's acceptance of the brother. Thy. And so we see the attitude of the elder brother in the possessive pronouns that he uses. We're going to shed just a little bit more light on that in just a moment. But before we do that, move to the other member of the family here, the father. The father's pronouns are especially instructive in this parable. They tie things together. They tie together the attitude of the prodigal son. How? Well, just see verse 24. The prodigal comes and says, I'm not worthy for you to call me my son. Don't even call me my son. I'm not worthy to be called thy son. What does the father immediately respond? This my son was dead. Barry spoke this morning about restoring this one, bringing out that rub and restoring this one. Well, that's even seen in the words the father uses. He feels unworthy, and the father says, oh no, you're worthy. You're my son. That possessive pronoun, how much does that mean? To hear Jesus say to me, you're my brother, how much would that mean to me? To hear the Father, if I could audibly hear the Father, as in this case is giving a picture of this, if I know I've been lost in sin and I come home and I can hear my Father in heaven, if I could literally hear it, which I can, I hear it in His Word over and over again, but to hear Him say, you're my son. What a beautiful thing to hear from this young man. But you know what? The father doesn't just tie it in with the younger son. He ties it in with the elder brother as well. Because he uses a parallel verse. He says practically the same thing to both of them. And he gives both of them the lesson they need. By saying, you are my son to the to the penitent, he tells them you're being restored to a place where you formerly were. And then to the elder, he teaches him the lesson using almost exactly the same words. He says, it is meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again, was lost and is found. Listen to the two verses side by side. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. For this thy brother was dead and is alive again, was lost and is found. It's the exact same statement. He changes two words and he teaches us the whole point of what we're trying to understand this afternoon. My son is your brother. That's it. Verse 24 and verse 32 are parallels. But they give the lesson that each needs. That's where the elder brother fails to see it. If my father accepts him, if my father draws him in, how can I reject him? But now there is another in this parable that uses pronouns. It's easy to overlook him. But what about that servant? You know, the elder brother's coming home and he meets that servant. What about that servant? Consider his possessive pronouns. And this sheds a little more light on the elder brother. And he said unto him, thy brother is come, and thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. Why does it not read this way? And he said unto him, our brother is come, and our father hath killed the fatted calf. Or why does he not say to him, oh, my brother has come, and my father hath killed the fatted calf? Why does he not say that? Because he's not in the family. You don't want to read too much into that. He's a servant. He's a small part of the account. But what you can see from that absolutely is, how does someone speak when they're not in the family? They don't say our. They don't say my. They say yours. Your brother came. Your father. And the sad thing is, that's exactly how that elder brother speaks, even though he is in the family. As a matter of fact, he only uses one possessive pronoun referring to himself in the entire thing, and he says, I never got a goat so I could have fun with my friends. That's the only thing he could say and possess something in the entire parable. Your brother was lost, and he's found, and you're worried about whether or not you had a party with your friends. Reminds me of a brother that I listened to preaching who said, matter of fact, he spoke in this lectureship, Brother Eric Owens. Changed the way I pray when I heard his sermon, because he said this. You're worried about what car you have. You look at your neighbor's car and you're praying to God, oh, I wish I could, please bless me so I can have a car like their car. Maybe your car's old and ugly and hardly runs, and they've got this nice Lexus out there. He said, it wasn't long ago, maybe you were praying to even have a car so that you could get to work. And now you want that nice shiny car over there. You're praying for your neighbor's car, and your neighbor is going to hell. His brother was lost in sin. He's worried about whether or not he had parties with his friends. The attitude of the elder brother based upon this pronoun problem. So let's draw a contrast. Now that we've seen his attitude, let's draw a contrast between him and between Jesus. Jesus is our brother. The elder brother, of course, we understand is the Pharisees and of the day, and Jesus is responding to them. The sinner, the prodigal, is the publicans of the day. We understand that from the lessons that we've heard. But when we want to draw this crucial contrast between the two, let's do it this way. Let's talk about 3 different areas in which an individual would be involved with the prodigal. And let's see how the elder brother handles that. And let's see how our perfect example of a brother handles that. So first let's discuss the pre-prodigal. Let's talk about before this young man went away. What evidence do we have in the text whatsoever in the part where he is about to leave home, when he asks the father to give him his part of the inheritance? What evidence do we have whatsoever that this elder brother was playing any positive role in this brother's life? It would seem natural. I don't have a brother. I have 2 sisters, one of whom is 18 months apart from me. But I can tell you one thing. If while we were still in our parents' house together, my sister had said, "I'm going to leave," there would have been an interjection on my part, and we didn't even get along that well. But I would have interjected it. What do you mean you're going to leave? We're family. What about the good times we have together? What about the dinner table conversations? What about the time that you were in the accident and we were all there at the hospital with you? There would be an interjection there. There would be some sort of I would hope, thought process on her part about, but I'm leaving my brother, Matthew, if I leave this home. We don't see any evidence of that in the parable. But of course we don't, because the picture of the elder brother is the picture of the Pharisees. The Pharisees don't care about the publicans. They kind of need them because it's someone to point the finger at and say, "Look how holy I am. I'm not like them." But they don't care about them. But then contrast that with Jesus Christ, the perfect brother. He's far more righteous than even the Pharisees even thought that they were. And yet our brother Jesus is deeply invested in the pre-prodigal. No person in here was born before Jesus paid the greatest investment that he'll ever pay in man. So prior to you ever coming to this earth, prior to me ever coming to this earth, prior to you ever sinning, prior to me ever sinning, before we ever went out into the far country or even had opportunity to, Jesus invested himself in us in blood. And so when I become a Christian, I learn the gospel and I obey. I do that understanding what my brother did for me, my soon-to-be brother. What did Jesus do? He left heaven and came to this earth. He ministered to men who mocked him and reviled him, who eventually put him to death. Man, if that's not a loving brother, I don't know who that. I wasn't even in existence yet. And he did it for Matthew Jones. He did it for you. That is the kind of investment that a brother ought to have to a pre-prodigal. Not only did he do that, but he left the Comforter with the apostles so that they could teach me everything I need to know about how to live righteously, how to live close to him, how to know him, how to worship. Anything I need to know about spiritual life, he left it for me. That's the kind of investment that ought to be in the pre-prodigal. Kind of makes me wonder, what kind of investment am I making in my brother? Kind of makes me think about that. What is that investment that's being made? An investment of blood? Certainly. But you say, I can't do those things. I can't do what Jesus did in those things. No, but let's look at a situation in which Jesus found himself, in which he was physically there with a physical brother, and he physically responded to his need. Matthew 14:30 through 31. But when he saw the wind boisterous, this speaking of Peter, of course, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore did you doubt? I was right here beside you. I wasn't going to let you sink. Sometimes people say, well, he says, wherefore did you doubt? And people say that he sank because he doubted. I wonder sometimes if he's not saying, wherefore did you doubt? Because he just cried out, save me. Was Jesus really going to stand there and let him drown? I wonder about that. But certainly the response teaches us something. Man, I tell you what, Peter had better be glad he was not walking on those boisterous waves with the elder brother. The elder brother, well, he's, save me, I'm going to sink. And the elder brother would have said, well, that's your fault. You can't walk on the water like I can. What's wrong with you? You sink or swim, man. That's the difference between the attitude of the elder brother and of Jesus. This blatant disregard. We've seen the attitude, but let's make another contrast here. Certainly we need to see the difference between the way that Jesus would treat a pre-prodigal and the way the elder brother treats a pre-prodigal. And there's a reason for that, because we're coming to a point where we're going to have to make a response, isn't there? Where we're as individuals going to have to make a response to this. So we see the difference between the two. And then we can also see Jesus, who the Hebrew writer says calls himself our brother. What is the difference between, what is the contrast between the way that he deals with a prodigal and the way that the elder brother deals with the prodigal? Again, I invite you back to the text. If you want to open up to Luke 15 and consider anywhere within the text. You've heard it how many times this week? Where in the text have you heard about the elder brother reaching out to the prodigal? Now, we're not going to discuss how to do that. Brother Sapp already did that and did a great job of it. And if in your response you say, I need to do a better job of this, I encourage you to get a copy of the lecture book or a copy of Brother Sapp's lesson. And that will be your tools to say, well, how am I going to start doing this? Or how am I going to do this better? That'll be your tool for that. That's not what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss what is my responsibility there. And then he would instruct you on how to do that. But the important thing that we see in the text is there is no indication whatsoever that this elder brother reached out to the prodigal. As a matter of fact, judging by what happens at the end, it's pretty obvious there's no way that he did. Now that means something. And that's important. Because in contrast, look back to Jesus again. A man says, you've got to be kidding me. Are you telling me that if my brother goes into this disgusting, sinful world, I'm talking about, you don't know the sin that he committed. You don't know what he's out there doing. He's a homosexual. I'm supposed to go to him? He's an alcoholic. I'm supposed to go to him? If you knew what he was caught up in, you would not be saying, am I really responsible? Am I really to be a keeper to my brother when he goes into this vile disgustingness? When in this sin, he treated me horribly when he went away. Am I really to do that? Jesus did. We had a Father in heaven, in that safe place of heaven, and with him was the Word. But John tells us that the Word became flesh. Simply that statement, that the Word became flesh, is enough to show us the fact that Jesus has interest in prodigals. He left the home of the Father, put on flesh, and came to this, the far country, this world, the far country of sin. And that alone was enough. But then he allowed the inhabitants of the far country of sin to put him to death. So that what? So that he could bring every prodigal home. Now remember the importance here, because again, we're going to be looking at responses to this. The difference between the elder brother and our perfect brother. The prodigal, the pre-prodigal, the prodigal. But how about contrasting Jesus Christ and the elder brother when it comes to the return of the penitent? Well, there's a big difference there, and that's what we generally think about. We generally, in this parable, we think about, man, he reacted very badly when his brother came home. So let's contrast the two. Reception of the penitent. We got anybody in here that's interested in politics? I imagine there's a few. You know, I've seen brethren. A lot of things happen when you're around brethren. A lot of discussions come up because we're brothers and sisters. But I've seen brethren absolutely bash each other over political views, political decisions. So-and-so won the presidency. And so what happens? One side rejoices, the other side reviles him. Resentment over here, joy over here, and it comes between brethren. But more than that, just think of it this way. Your man is election night, and your man is up for it. I campaigned in 2004. I did a 72-hour grassroots campaign in Florida. And we went to election headquarters afterward and awaited the results. That takes a long time. You've been out door knocking all day, and then you got to go sit in this room and watch TVs just ticker. This place closed, this place closed. But at the moment that they announced what happened, a great deal of emotion occurred in that room. I mean, I've not seen people that excited. They were adults, you know. It's not like teenagers. These people were grown adults jumping around, hugging each other, screaming. You ever been to a football game? I've heard brethren in the church come into serious fights over football teams. And more than that, think about it. I am an Alabama Crimson Tide fan. I am a fair Alabama Crimson Tide fan. I was neither. I went to college. I went to both games, Auburn and Alabama. You have to pick one. And Alabama was far and away, in my opinion, the better program. 2 years ago, we won't talk about last year, but 2 years ago, Alabama won the national championship. I watched that game and I was excited. And you know what it ended up doing, though? That ended up having to teach me a lesson. It indicted me. How excited was I that Alabama Crimson Tide, how excited was I that a bunch of lost young men went out onto a field, carried a piece of leather around, struggling against another group of lost young men. And one of them got the leather across the line more times than the other. And boy, that got me pumped up because they wear an A on their helmet. Boy, that got me pumped up because he's got a D next to his name when he's speaking, or an R, or an I. Republican, Democrat, Independent. What difference would it have made if before the game those two sides had switched uniforms and played the game? It's still a bunch of lost young men trying to carry a piece of leather against another group of lost young men, and yet we get so excited. And it makes me ask myself, what about when a lost young man walks down an aisle and sits on a front pew? And I weigh the two against each other. He just went from hell to heaven. Which excited me more? Which brought up more passion in me? The elder brother failed at this tremendously. We've already looked at the text. You've heard the text many times. His response that he had wouldn't even go in. But what about Jesus? What is Jesus' reaction? Before we say that, I want to quote Buttrick, one of the guys that I read a great deal on in preparing for this. He said this: "Many a man has been driven back to the far country by the lovelessness of the elder brother." It's an interesting statement, Mr. Buttrick. You know, that makes me think, Mr. Buttrick. I know there's a member who keeps coming down the aisle every couple of months, and he sits on that pew, and you know what I say, Mr. Buttrick? I say, here he comes again. Oh, he'll do this again next month. You know, Mr. Buttrick, there's this guy who keeps coming down here sitting on this front pew, and he goes back and, you should know the things he does. He goes right back into them. We call them sometimes repeat offenders. We got this repeat offender. He goes and he does this. Recently, met up with a young man who had gone forward. And he went forward, and he'd been forward many times before. And it was said as he went forward, he said, I want to get my life right. I want to do it right this time. I had been studying for this material. And I've been very convicted by the fact that I had not been doing right. I had not been helping in the areas that I should be. And so I made it a point. I said, I'm going to help him. And I spoke positively of him to other members. And I had a member come to me and say, why are you bothering? He's going to just go away again anyway. That's a hard thing to say. But then again, how often do my thoughts really kind of indicate that when we see those so-called repeat offenders go down? And I want to say that to say this. About 3 individuals got deeply invested in him out of the entire congregation because again, he's a certain age and all this. But he stayed for a while and then he left again. But it made me wonder if every single member of that congregation that he was attending had responded to him the way that those 3 did, do you think he would be gone back into that world? I know he wanted to. We keep saying, well, he keeps coming down, but his heart's not in it because he keeps coming down. No, his heart is in it. The man whose heart's not in it doesn't ever come down the aisle. He's still out there in the world. This guy's shaming himself. Every couple of months when he opens up his Bible some night, when he's sitting there after he has been involved in some sin, and he says, man, I know this is right. Man, I've got to do this. But he's weak, and he comes to the service, and he comes down the aisle, and he sits down, and he begs, please, help me. And we say, I love you, and we walk out the door. Or we just walk out the door. Some preachers have said, I have a hard time with these people who don't come down and hug the person, they just walk out the door. And I agree with that sentiment. And then as I thought about this last night, I thought, in all honesty, if I come down front and I tell you I'm struggling, I'm hurting, I need your help, I'd almost rather you walk out the door than come down and hug me and not help me. At least you're being honest in your response. Now I have to emphasize again, this sermon goes from the baptistry forward. Because I have to look at myself before I ever preach this, and I have to say to myself, I got to do better at this. What would Jesus do if a man came down and said, I need help? He would help him. That's what Jesus would do. That's not what the elder brother does. What action is the elder brother doing to ensure that his prodigal brother does not go away again? Nothing. The father had to take care of that. The servants, apparently, who are in this party with him are taking care of that. But what would Jesus do? Jesus would help him. There's a contrast there. And so it leads us to, there's got to be a reasonable response that we can make to this. And there's only a couple things to which we need to make a reasonable response. Number one, we need to notice that there's got to be a response in respect to the elder brother himself. We need to respond to that man. We need to say something to him. And then we need to respond to our subject. What is my responsibility here? But before we respond to this elder brother, let's put him in his place. Here he is acting these ways, doing these things. And let's just tell him, you're ugly. You are an ugly man. You got a cold heart. How can you watch your brother come home and not care? You need to put him in his place. And if we're going to properly put him in his place, we need to recognize that inside the parable, he is ugly. Or we can ridicule him all day. We can talk bad about him all day. We have all lectureship. Jesus was not painting a pretty picture of him. He's ugly. But then, I want you to consider this. I found this quote as I was studying this. In the parable, the elder brother is not impressive. In the parable, we're ready to hurl stones at him. Out of the parable, he is not anathematized. Out of the parable, he is held in considerable regard. And in strict fairness, a certain tribute must be paid him. He was steadily industrious on the day of rejoicing. He came in late from the field. He was conscientious, dependable, and consistent. Mr. Buttrick again said that. Now he's not defending him there. It sounds like he is a little bit. But what he's actually doing is he's painting a picture of who the elder brother really is. The elder brother, if I'm going to respond to him, if I'm going to put him in his proper place, I'm going to have to understand that I'm responding to perhaps some people that I respect. Some of the people that I may respect may be elder brothers. It may be that elder is an elder brother. It may be that deacon is an elder brother. That preacher that I love to hear, great preacher, but is he an elder brother? It may be that the Bible class teacher is an elder brother. The speaker on the lectureship is an elder brother. They work so hard. They do great works. They print books. They preach sermons. They stand in front of Bible classes. But what do they do when the prodigal goes away? When he goes out into the far country? What do they do to bring him home? What do they do when he comes home? How do they ensure he doesn't leave again? But you know what? That's all kind of beside the point, isn't it? Other than to put it in perspective. Because the truth of the matter is, when I put the elder brother in his place, I have to look him square in the eye and say, sometimes I'm you. That's how I put him in his place. Sometimes I am you. And so what's my response to it? When I respond to him, I've got to respond to self. So let's have some statements we're going to make to self. Self, stop working so hard at what seems righteous that you overlook the needs of the brother in your midst. Well, I do this, and this. I work hard. I work 60 hours a week, and then I take time to do this work, and I teach a Bible class, and I have to raise my children, and I do the bulletin, and I cut up the pew bulletin and put it in the pews. That's good. Those are good things to do. But if they take the place of caring for my brother, I've missed the boat. Consider Martha. Jesus comes and she says, brother, do you not care that my sister's not helping me? Look at the good things I'm doing, and I'm doing them for you. What's his response? Martha, Martha. You're doing good things, but you've forgotten the one thing that's needful. I cannot trade hard work for caring for my brother. I can't even trade, and this is where this hit me as I was studying it. I cannot trade reaching out to alien sinners. I do that all day, every day. Well, no, you don't. But even if you really did, you can't trade that for caring for your brother. You can't go before the Lord in judgment and He says, what happened to your brother that's lost? He comes to you as He came to Cain and says, what happened to your brother that's lost? And you say, oh, I was out in the world getting the alien sinners in. You can't trade it. And so I have to respond to self, and I have to say, no matter what good things I do for the Lord, I've got to be responsible for my brother. The response to the elder brother is well carried out in the fact that I need to respond in the sense that what exactly must I do to keep the charge to be my brother's keeper? Does this apply to you as an individual? Preacher, student, gospel preacher, elder, deacon, lectureship director? Whatever role you're in today, does this apply to you? Does this concept of the elder brotherism, does it apply to you? If it does, then it's time to make a response. Some might be saying, some in this room, and if it's the case, then that's great. Some might be saying, not me. Honestly speaking, no. I take care of my brethren perfectly. When they come forward, I help them in every way. That's fine. And if that's the case, more power to you. You know what we need? We need you to help people who aren't. That's what we need you to do. If you've got the handle on this and you do it right, help me do it right. Bring me with you when you help them so that I can learn. But I'll ask you this, whether you're thinking I need this or you're thinking not me, would you be honest and take a quick assessment of yourself? I'll give you the tools to do that. Would you do what I did when I said, you know what, I need to assess myself. And so I assessed myself. I said, That tells me something. Would you do the same? Let me ask you this. Most of you have a pen, piece of paper. Some of you have a lectureship book. If you have a lectureship book, open up your lectureship book to the section. You can use it right there. It's right there in front of you. If you don't, get out a piece of paper and a pen. I didn't know if I was allowed to put this in the lectureship book, but they didn't take it out, so I guess I was. Page 401 of the lectureship book is the assessment. I encourage there in the paragraph before, if you've come this far in reading this, not a lot of people just read straight through a lectureship book, so if you've come this far in reading this, you're probably a very dedicated person. Why don't you take a moment to write some things down? Why don't you take a moment to write this down? You come this far in the sermon. We're almost done. Why don't you take a moment to evaluate self? Am I like the elder brother or am I like Jesus? Which side am I leaning toward? Who are the last 3 people to respond at your congregation? If you've got a piece of paper there, write that question down. Who are the last 3 people to respond at such and such congregation? First and last names. Can you write that down? Think about it. Do you know the first and last names of the last 3 people to respond to your congregation? Second question. Why did each of those individuals respond? 1, 2, 3 again. 1, why did person number 1 respond? What was their need? What was their struggle? Now as you write, let me say this. If you get all 6 of these down, that's good. That's very good. If you don't get all 6 of these down, I didn't at the time. If you don't get all 6 of these down, you say, man, how can I not know the last 3 people to respond? That's an indication right there. I don't even know their names. Or, I remember their names. I remember seeing them go down there. I don't remember what their problem was. Well, what was my attitude when they went down there, maybe? Maybe I was thinking, that's another 10, 15 minutes before we get to go to lunch. Maybe I was thinking, oh, there he goes again. Maybe I just don't remember. It wasn't a priority in my life. But you know what? Those good if you know those, but here is where the rubber meets the road. Third question. What have you been doing since then to help encourage each of those individuals? 1, 2, 3. Hugs are good. Cards are good. But what have you done? This person saw fit to stand up in a room full of people, walk right down the front, be center of attention, and say, either I've sinned or help me. What have you done? There's some good, honest self-analysis can be done there in those questions. A brother in Christ is a Christian's responsibility at all times. Let me ask you this. Let's go back to that person who comes down front. And this will wrap us up to our simple solution. He comes down front. And he sits down. And this is why this sermon is different than the last one. This sermon is completely different than the last time I preached. Someone say, well, is this sermon going to be better than the last sermon? It's a completely different sermon. This is 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. If you're here, there are probably some good things that can be said about you as an individual. Okay? This is not Sunday morning worship service where you got even visitors from the community walking in the door. It's 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon. This is a whole different sermon because we're not going to have some prodigal come down here more than likely. We're not even offering the gospel invitation this afternoon. But this person comes down and sits down on this pew, and he sits down here, and the preacher comes down, and he says, I've been lost in this sin, I've sinned, I've besmirched the name of Christ, I've got friends, and they do these evil things, and I follow after them, and we do these things together, and he says, and the preacher takes it back up, and he comes up to the pulpit, and he corrects himself, and he fixes himself up a little bit, and he stands up here, and he says, Brother so-and-so responds this morning. And he says, and he reads it how I've sinned. I need help staying out of it. Let me ask you a question. If you say that, what would you say is 99% of the time what's going to happen for this brother? He's going to stand up at the end of service. We're going to say a prayer for him. People are going to come down and hug him, and they're going to go away. But let me ask you these 3 questions. Number 1, if I hug him and walk away, does Satan throw up his hands and quit? If I hug him and walk away, do those wicked friends stop calling and texting him? Do those co-workers, those schoolmates, do they stop tempting him to do the things they're doing? No. If I hug him and walk away, is he going to do the same? But in a sense, walk away from the Lord again. What is my responsibility to my brother? How do I respond to this responsibility to be my brother's keeper? How do I be more like Jesus who meets people's needs? I follow one simple solution. And this is the main part of my sermon this afternoon. This is the chief point of my sermon this afternoon. And so we'll begin with this. What's the simple solution? Be more like God. And be more like the third brother in the parable. The one who told it.